Welcome to this video all about the books that I've been reading in the last 2 months. Let's just dive right in. The first book that I've been reading recently is called Isaac and the Egg by Bobby Palmer. This is the only fiction book that I've read in a very long time. I'm usually a non-fiction gal, but this one just happened to catch my eye. I saw it in the bookshop and I had a voucher at the time, so I wasn't spending my own money, I was spending some birthday money, and I just thought I'd give it a go. It has a lot of really nice reviews on it, and it seemed to be a little bit mysterious as well. Like I wasn't quite sure what it's about, so I decided to purchase it. This book ended up being about grief and how the main character manages their grief and moves past it into a place of acceptance and love. The egg is actually a character in this book. I don't want to give too much away, but the egg essentially helps the main character overcome their grief. I thought the storyline was quite inspired, really imaginative in some ways, and yet also quite realistic in other ways. The only thing that I didn't like about this book is that I felt like it wasn't necessarily anything new. The addition of the egg definitely makes it unique, but stories of grief and overcoming loss I feel are quite common, and in spite of the fact that this book is beautifully written and very well thought out, I just didn't feel like I got anything particularly notable out of it. I enjoyed the read, but I don't think I would read it again. I think this book is definitely more suited to people who enjoy an emotional fictional story and who enjoy watching characters develop and overcome emotional obstacles. If you're into those kind of books, then this is one that I would definitely recommend. But for me personally, particularly as a non-fiction reader, it just didn't really hit the mark with me. But nonetheless, I'm happy that I picked it up and gave it a go. The second book that I've read in the last 2 months is called You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero. I'm just going to call her Jen for the rest of this video. This book is absolutely awesome. I love Jen. I've read her You Are a Badass at Making Money book, and it is by far the best financial self-help book I've ever read. Jen has such a wonderful way of writing that is actually really entertaining and really funny. She herself is a best-selling author and success coach. So she basically coaches people on how to find more happiness and love and money in their life, and has been for quite a number of years, I think. And I think this is her first book. I could be wrong, but I think this is her first book. And it's basically not about any particular aspect of life, for example, money or love or success or purpose or things like that. But instead it's just an all-rounder, how to improve your life and achieve amazing things and really reach your full potential. That's what this book is mainly about, how to unleash your full potential and spread love and joy all around the world. I've read a number of self-help books just because I really enjoy learning about how to expand my mind and improve my own life, and this one is definitely the best general self-help book by far that I've read. And I think, like I mentioned, Jen's book specifically about how to make money is the best financial self-help book I've read. Jen's just so entertaining, and even though the content of these books I guess do reflect a lot of other self-help books, the way that Jen writes and the stories that she includes of herself and her client's success are really just amazing. And she phrases things in particular ways that really resonate with me and that I haven't heard before. An example of this is, where did she say it? I know she said something. Yes, I remember now. She said in this book, not forgiving someone is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And I just thought that was absolutely brilliant. And it's something that I will probably hold on to for a very long time. And if I feel like someone's annoying me, or if I feel hard done by someone, I'm probably going to think back to that quote and just not drink the poison and instead try to look at the situation with forgiveness and compassion instead. Really little things like that make this book well worth the investment of like, what, $20 or however much it is. I highly recommend You Are a Badass. The next book that I read recently is Obsessed by Alison Britz. This book is basically about Alison and how she manages her OCD. It tells a story of how she first developed OCD as a teenager and how she now manages it as an adult as well. I actually found this book really interesting. I just picked it up for a couple of dollars at my local op shop and I read it almost instantly. I think I finished in about 2 or 3 days. I found it really interesting to hear the first-hand perspective of someone who initially didn't have OCD and was a relatively normal, engaged, enthusiastic student who was actually doing really well at school. And then the trigger for the OCD, which in Alison's case was a dream that she had. It says in the back, she had a vivid nightmare in which she was diagnosed with brain cancer. And so the next day she woke up and thought that if she didn't step on cracks, she wouldn't develop brain cancer, as this dream seemed to have foreshadowed. This logic kind of just led her down a rabbit hole of more and more things that could cause cancer. In the end, her grades dropped at school, she lost a lot of friends, her parents didn't understand what was going on, and so finally she went to see a therapist. And it also talks a little bit about her first few meetings with a therapist and how the therapist helped her start to see why her thoughts were irrational and give her techniques to try and overcome the OCD. I enjoyed this book because it was really interesting to see how someone who didn't have OCD at all could be affected so quickly by it. One thing that I felt was missing from this book though was that when Alison recounts her time with her therapist, she doesn't at all mention the nightmare that she had that triggered the OCD to begin with. She mentions the nightmare in detail in the part of the story where it actually happened, but then there's no reference to it for the rest of the book. So I'd like to find out a bit more about if the therapist had any thoughts of the nightmare itself and how the nightmare might have been still affecting, or actually was definitely still affecting her OCD because it was the trigger for all these irrational thoughts that she was having. Despite this, I thought that this book, Obsessed, was actually a really interesting and insightful look into someone with OCD, and I just thought it was fascinating. And I'm really glad that Alison ended up writing this book. It says on the back or in her little author's note or something that her husband really encouraged her to write it, so I'm glad that she did because it was a really eye-opening book and really interesting to read. The next book that I've read recently is Humankind by Rutger Bregman. This is a brand new book, I think. I think it's only recently released, and it's wonderful. It's basically a book about how humans are actually inherently kind, which is something that, as someone who watches the news a lot, is a really refreshing thing to learn. Rutger goes through a number of studies in the past that have supposedly shown that humans are inherently, evil in nature. One of them being a woman who was murdered in New York and how 38 bystanders supposedly didn't call the police. He also looks at stories like Lord of the Flies, and then ends up finding a real-life Lord of the Flies, where 6 boys were actually stranded on a desert island together, I think about 40 or 50 years ago now, and how they didn't end up killing each other, but instead became best friends and worked together to survive for over a year on this deserted island. He also talks about the evolutionary benefits of humans being kind-natured to each other, and just gives a whole bunch of really interesting examples of how past experiments that show that humans aren't good basically have been wrong, or that may have flaws in their arguments or in their data, and how a lot of the evidence these days points to the fact that humans are actually very kind-natured and very kind to each other on the whole. Not only did I find this book particularly fascinating to read, but it was also just really refreshing to hear about all these stories of humans being kind to each other. I think this is a really important book for everyone to read because it just gives you a new perspective on humanity. And if nothing else, it just makes you feel really good when you read it. Finally, another book that I've been reading in the last 2 months is called Partition Voices, Untold British Stories by Kavita Puri. This book is another one that I just picked up in my local op shop, and it's really fascinating. This talks about the time of partition, when India was split into India and Pakistan in the late 1940s, where typically the Muslim population moved to Pakistan and the Hindi population stayed in India. I must admit I had no idea that this is how Pakistan started as a country, and I certainly learned a lot about that through this book. This book is basically a collection of stories told by people who were alive during this partition time and their own personal experiences of it. Some that were Muslim, some that were Hindi, some that had to move, some that saw neighbors move or lost loved ones, or the whole spectrum of, upheaval that happens when one country is split into two. All the people who are featured in this book have since moved to Britain as well. So it talks a lot also about the British influence on partition, because I believe it was a British man who originally drew the boundaries between India and Pakistan. and how this had a massive effect on the population as well. The people in this book talk fondly or not so fondly about their time in India and Pakistan during the partition, and then also talk about what life was like once they migrated to Britain as well. And it's just a piece of history that I never knew about. And I'm so glad that I picked up this book and got to learn about it. I feel like it's such an important part of world history that not many people really talk about anymore. And I'm really glad that I not only got to learn about it, but also learn about stories from people who were actually there too. That sums up all the books that I've been reading in the last 2 months. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye!